Olivia Fleming, and the book I'm going to be talking about is The Telltale Brain, A Neuroscientist's Quest for What Makes Us Human, written by a neuroscientist himself, Ramachandran. And this book shares his views through the use of different studies and beliefs mentioned in his writing. There are many anecdotes and stories that led the way to psychological breakthroughs in the realms of synesthesia, autism, as well as the correlation to the brain and sight. So the first topic brought up in the book is the connection between what our eyes see and what is actually happening, or how we perceive that. This is a big idea in the talk of phantom limbs. So last year I actually read the book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, and phantom limbs were a big part of his research there as well. Both researchers explain a phantom limb by a person who is missing a limb, such as a leg or a hand, but they are still able to feel it as if it's still a part of their body, even though it's not. So this is where researchers are investigating and studying how our eyes see one thing, but our body actually feels another. Ramachandran then begins to explain a set of experiments done on a patient a while back whose name was Victor. So Victor had lost his hand a few weeks ago, and it was a few weeks before seeking help because he noticed that his phantom hand would begin to itch or cramp and things like that, even though it wasn't there. So he didn't know how to fix it, and he had no way of actually stopping that from happening. So Ramachandran began running a Q-tip across his arms, legs, and just like other parts of his body, having Victor point out exactly where he felt it and what he felt happening. So when the doctor got to the left side of his face, actually, Victor was shocked to feel the same thing on his phantom hand, even though it wasn't touching there, as different parts of his face fit exactly to what his hand felt. When the doctor put water on his cheek, he would feel the same sensation on his hand, and even go as far as to try to wipe it off his hand or dry his phantom limb. So as much more research and thinking was done, the psychologists came to the idea or conclusion that the motor command centers that control the limbs and understand what the limbs are doing are often placed on what we call pilot mode, meaning the brain might not fully recognize the limb is gone and continue to send signals to it without much attention being paid. So this causes people to continue to feel, itch, or cramp up in places that aren't even present on their bodies, such as a lost arm. This is a fascinating discovery in my personal idea, which led me to the question on how the body chooses what are replacing the feelings of the phantom limb. So in Victor's case, it was the left side of his face that he felt, but I was always kind of questioning why the brain chose the left side of his face, because in different people it would be different parts of their body. So how the brain chose to focus on that specific part was always an interesting thing for me to look into. So the next connection I made to the book is something that's really interesting to me: synesthesia. A really big part of Ramachandran's research is the investigation of synesthesia, as not much research has been done for it in the past, as it's kind of a difficult topic. So the first part of looking into synesthesia is actually trying to define it, and it's kind of difficult to do that because there's so many altercations and changes for each person in each scenario. So the overall definition the researcher uses is a surreal blending of sensation, perception, and emotion. To explain in easier terms, it is explain that synesthesia, which many people have, is when one sensory input, such as a noise, is mixed with another, such as sight. This leads people to see noises or music, but there are many different combinations. As this may be a slightly difficult idea to test due to the researcher not being able to see exactly what the participant sees, Ramachandran goes through with many experience with all different types of synesthesia. One mentioned was a participant whose name was Susan. So Susan was thought to have what people call grapheme letter or grapheme color synesthesia. This is when shown numbers and letters are associated with particular colors. So to test this, the researcher first showed Susan a bunch of numbers and letters to see what colors were evoked by looking at them. So one thing noticed, and I want to take note for further explaining, is that the number 7 actually made her think, and she saw number 7 as a bright blood red. So the thing I found most interesting is that many people believed synesthesia wasn't real, but just a memorization of something from the past. For example, if you had a refrigerator magnet with colored letters, you may see the letter L as purple because that was what you saw as a child on the magnet. To demonstrate this is false, or to help support the idea that this is false, Ramachandran actually tested the memory theory with Susan. So Susan knew Roman numerals, so she would know which number belongs to what. So if she saw the Roman numeral for 7, she'd know. And so when they showed her the Roman numeral for 7, which used to evoke a bright blood red, there was no color. It was just seen in black, which was the color it was shown in. And this proves, or it doesn't exactly prove, but it helps support the conclusion that memory doesn't play a role, because she knew the Roman numeral was 7, but not looking at 7 gave her just black. So this is actually the topic for my EE, which is why I found it so interesting. And something I find really fascinating is how the researchers are able to study a topic like this without truly knowing much information about it and how it's developed in so many people. Another thing I found interesting was how they got participants in this study, because it's not a very common or well-known thing in people, and a lot of people are actually found to not know they have it. So being able to find participants who kind of recognize that they have the synesthesia is an interesting thing for me. So lastly, Ramachandran looks at autism and the symptoms that characterize autism in children. So he doesn't particularly say that it's only children that he's researching, but the only participants he used were children. So these can be broken down into 2 groups, the social cognitive and the sensory motor. In social cognitive, you can see things such as a lack of contact with the world and others around them, including family, mental aloneness, and difficulty engaging in conversations. And this can be seen in many kids with autism, as it holds a large category for their behavior and mental processes operationalized by the amount of times they engage in communications with others, especially with their family. So the second group of symptoms is called sensory motor, representing the category in which some super specific stimuli or connections with the world become highly distressing for the child. This includes certain noises, objects, or even things like colors. So the child, if looking at sensory motor, the child will then create a behavior that to demonstrate or show the distress that they're in, including rocking back and forth or repetitive hitting of themselves or others. This was studied in a child with autism whose name was Stephen. Stephen and his family often went to Ramachandran in order to study and investigate his behaviors and habits that continued throughout the entirety of his life so far, and he was around the age of 15. One thing he looked at longitudinally was Stephen's reaction through the sensory motor symptoms, which included him getting severely upset by noises, often causing him to rock back and forth, which was a direct example of a symptom if a child had autism. So Ramachandran goes as far as to say that these sensory motors are often so occurring and important in a child with autism's life that looking at what autism is would not be complete without directly looking at this part and how it impacts them and their lives. I think a big part of why I loved this book so much was the ability to find incredibly interesting quotes on almost every page I read. So even though there were so many, in particular, 2 quotes really stuck out to me. The first quote was on page 46, and it is, "Our perception of the world ordinarily seems so effortless that we tend to take it for granted. You look, you see, you understand. It seems so natural and inevitable as water flowing downhill. It's only when something goes wrong, as in patients like John, that we realize how extraordinarily sophisticated it really is." And so I like this quote because you don't really see how easy your thinking and abilities are until you realize how others are. During psych, we watched a video of a kid my age with Tourette's. I didn't really realize how easy I had it going to the store, eating lunch with my friends, even just talking to my family, until I saw what he had to go through every day and what his everyday life was like with the people around him. I feel like as a community, although many people are going through many different things that we may not know about, we should all take time to look at what we have and realize that we should be grateful. This book is a way for people of many different ages to see the lives of others and how different each and every person is. Even if the people in the book don't truly understand their impact on others, it's really important reading this book to understand who they are and how they get treated every single day. I often go through my day not even thinking about walking quietly down the hall or even being able to speak in front of the class. This book opened my eyes to others and how their brains impact their life, even if it is in small ways or great big ways. Okay, so lastly, the second quote I would like to share is on page 251, and it says, "Continuity. Despite the enormous number of distinct events punctuating your life, you feel a sense of continuity of identity through time, moment to moment, decade to decade." And as Endo had noted, you can engage in mental time travel, starting from early childhood and projecting yourself into the future, sliding to and fro effortlessly. So this quote explains how continuity is something we as humans actually get to have. We get to think of the past and what happened to us, good or bad. We get to experience moments in our heads for the second, third, fourth time if we wanted to. Something not all people are able to do is remember such important events of their life, but many of us will be able to recall our wedding day, the day we met our best friend, or the day we got the job we wanted. This continuity helps us continue our lives in one line, every moment meaning something important for now, but it may just become another dot on the continuous timeline we are creating for ourselves. And I think this quote really sums up a cool part of the book because it explains how fascinating others' lives and your life is, and how you shouldn't really take for granted what you have.